great guests for you guys now in studio. Joining me now is Zefrey Throwell, Carlos Marroquin, and Josh Androsky, and they are part of a movie that we are going to talk to you guys about called Free Parking. Now, Zefrey, you directed it, and you guys are in it, Carlos and Josh. So first of all, let me go to you, Zefrey. What is it?
Well, it's a short doc, 16 minutes about what banking looks like right now in the United States, right? Like what's wrong with banking and how we can fix it. So, okay, then this is a layup. What's wrong with banking? Well, I would say one of the main things wrong with banking right now is, you go to the bank, you deposit your money. Most of the people in the world, in the United States rather, don't know what the hell the bank is doing with their money, right? They can be activists watching the Young Turks out there protesting. Meanwhile, they're at Chase Bank, and Chase Bank is funding some of the worst things in the world with their money, right? And this is an attempt to educate people, but then also show them other ways that they can invest their money.
So Josh, you're an activist. What are they doing with your money? I mean, it sounds kind of ominous.
Right, well the problem is it changes all the time, but it's always the worst thing that's happening. So just imagine what the worst possible thing is and they're doing it. Everything from, and we're talking like when you go buy an ice cream cone, right? Like your sales tax goes to the private prisons that Trump's government is keeping undocumented children in. Did you know that? Like when you go buy ice cream, you're supporting this horrible, horrible tragedy, like guns, pipelines, their own pockets, just the worst of the worst. And they buy speedboats and cocaine with it. I don't know what they're spending the money on, but it's not going to the places that it needs to go.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's speedboats I have less problem with. It's like if I put my money in a bank, look, before I got involved in the movie, before I started talking to you, Zefrey, before I got involved in any of this, I had no idea what they were doing with my money, and it's not like they're giving you a great interest rate, right? So, but they're not doing it to be evil, I imagine. They just don't care, right?
This is late stage capitalism. The squeeze is on to make the most amount of money possible. That's it, right? So these things make a lot of money. They're funneling it in. It's our job, right, as their customers, as consumers in this world, to say, you might be able to make some money there, but we'd rather you invest in more ethical things, right?
Right, but like, I want you guys to understand something. And this is my experience based on covering a lot of the news. When they're talking about making a lot of money, they're not making a lot of money for you. They're making a lot of money for themselves. And what I mean by that is, like at a bank, for example, you're going to get like a 0.02% interest rate normally at the big banks. Yeah. So it's not like you're getting rich off of it. No, they're taking most of the money and putting it in their pocket. So they're making the money from the fossil fuel companies, the private prisons, et cetera. And they're giving you a tiny, tiny morsel of it. And it's true in a lot of cases. I remember when I had the epiphany, embarrassingly late in life, that we were invading countries like Iraq. And they'd say, activists would say for the oil. And I'd be like, guys, I don't get it. It's not like we get the oil, we're not taking their oil. Then I realized, oh, you knucklehead, we're not getting the oil. ExxonMobil's getting the oil. They're getting the oil contracts. They're making the money. The American taxpayer gets nothing out of it. And if you're putting money into one of the big banks, you're getting almost nothing out of it. They're making the money from those dirty industries. Now, Carlos, this affected you personally in a sense. You want to tell your story? Yeah.
Correct. I mean, we saw what happened during the financial crisis where a lot of people lost their homes through the fraud that the banks were committing. I was one of them. I had over $300,000 of equity. I was not behind payments, and literally the bank stole my house. I went through court here in Los Angeles, and the judge ruled in my favor, giving me the house back based on all the fraud that was committed. Yet we had Bank of America literally ignore the judge's decision and still evicted me from the home. So this is what the banks do. Things have not changed. The crimes are still being committed. And we see that through Wells Fargo, a classical example of the kind of fraud that they continue to commit.
Yeah, so often the average American gets squeezed, and then Fox News will turn around and yell at you, say, oh, you should have been your personal responsibility, et cetera. when you were making your damn payments, right? Then they'll turn around and like they did this morning, literally, and say, oh, Donald Trump losing over $1 billion, that's just good business. And him not paying back his creditors is being a smart businessman. So when he screws them out of $1 billion, that's apparently smart business. You make your payments and they take your house anyway, and somehow that's your fault.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, they say, okay, I'm kicking you out. Did they actually physically kick you out of your house, or were you able to stay in while the court proceedings happened?
Well, actually, I was going through court, and what they did is, in the meantime, they kept flipping my house from one bank to the other one. I ended up with Dutch Bank. What they did is they took this to another court, a different court. And when I showed up with my judgment to show the judge that this case already had been heard, the judge tells me, take your paper and get out of my court before I put you in jail. The house belongs to the bank. Even though that I have a paper that says that the house belongs to me. So this is the kind of corruption that exists and that has not been corrected. Now we have bigger banks. The banks have been deregulated even more. So, if we don't rise up, if we don't fight back, if we don't come out with better ideas for better banking, we're only going to see this to continue.
So look, we've got a sponsor, aspiration.com, and they underwrote this as well. And so the audience, if you've been watching Young Turks, you know that there are alternatives. But I want to talk about more than just that. So Josh, what are the different alternatives? Because most people, if they're not watching the Young Turks, they don't know about aspiration, they don't know about any of it, right? They think, well, what am I gonna do? I'm going to go Wells Fargo or Bank of America. So what do you want me to do? So what are the options?
So credit unions exist. Credit unions are a very good place where there's not this sort of predatory aspect to for example, foreclosing on people's homes and then getting a judge to threaten to put people in jail, right? But this problem is it's a systemic problem. It's not just like you and me. We all have our bank accounts in these private banks. Cities do. The city of Los Angeles has their money in Wells Fargo and Chase and all these places. And so earlier this year, we aimed up at the city of Los Angeles, a group of us activists, Carlos included, and we tried to put forth public banking, which is a model of banking that is very successful around Europe, Germany. They actually fund a significant portion of their renewable energy economy through public banking. And it just essentially cuts out the Wall Street middleman, right? Like, why is a guy shaving 50% off the top of all the infrastructure payments? Like, why does 50 cents of every dollar we spend in infrastructure go to a bank? That doesn't make sense. And so with public banking, we would effectively be able to double infrastructure investments.
So yeah, but you couldn't possibly do that in an American state, could you?
Actually, funny you should mention that. The state of North Dakota they've had a public bank since a bunch of socialists call themselves like the Farm League or something in like I want to say like 1917, 1918. And the Public Bank of North Dakota was able to withstand the economic collapse of 2008 much better than other like comparable banks because they didn't have their stuff invested in lousy mortgages.
Yeah, and so the well-known liberal state of North Dakota has a public bank, and if you're wondering like, okay, so what is the rationale for not having a public bank? Well, there's some legitimate things that some private banks can do, et cetera. But there's also the BS excuse that they use largely all over television, which is no, you need private banks to be creative so they can have creative financial instruments. Well, those are the things that blew up our economy in 2008, right? So that's why do your research on your banks, right? Look, they're a sponsor of ours, but that's for a reason, because we did our research on aspiration. That's why we know that they pay like almost literally 100x return. But when you see that, it's not to brag about them, it's to say that the other banks can too. They just choose not to. They just choose to pocket the other 99% of the money that they made off of the investments that you put in. Or you could look at public banks. We're not just telling you to do, our sponsor, definitely not. Community organizations, et cetera. So please look into that. You have options, you need to realize that. But Zefrey, I want to go back to you. Why did you call it free parking? I'm curious about that, and why the monopoly analogy?
Yeah, I consider it, my hope is, most of the time when people hear about banking, financial regulations, politics, economics, whatever, just the glaze comes over their eyes, right? The more you can tether that to a game something that is fun, sports, what have you, the more people are interested, right? I like to talk about economics using strip poker. That's my favorite, right?
I'm one of the models that strips.
Right? Yeah, no, it's fantastic.
Me and you both, brother.
Yeah, he's all in. He's all in. Yeah. But free parking comes from this idea that really we are giving the money to the banks right now. We are giving them free parking with our cash, and they're just reaping it, and then funding the worst things in the world. Public banking, though, all across the United States, there's this massive movement, and in Los Angeles, there is.
It's in California, actually. We have SB 857, which already has passed 2 committees, and this is at the state level. We have formed a coalition of public banking in California where we have multiple cities already asking for public banking. This is big.
Yeah. Look, guys, I gotta be honest with you. I get educated through this show because I didn't know much about public banking until we started having these discussions. And the more I learned about it, I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And I remember the beginning of free parking when I say, like, do you know what you do with banks do with your money?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I don't know what they do with my money. So,
you're like, tell me.
Yeah, and then but I wish you hadn't. I'm kidding. Yeah. But yes, it turns out they do terrible things with your money, and so be careful where you're putting it. Last thing, I know I'm out of time, but Josh, I gotta ask you. It says in my notes here that you put socialist messaging into SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes, that is true. I did do that. We did an episode, I wrote on it with my friend Dan Dominguez, shout out. He's a TYT watcher. We wrote a story about the squirrel had a tree and she made butter from one of the nuts from the tree, and then it was gonna kill the tree, that she was working the tree too much, and too much unregulated business kills the environment. Just kind of seeping it into the kids' brains.
Good.
So you're the liberal Hollywood they've been warning about.
Yes,
The worst.
Alex Jones, fight me. I'll be in the parking lot. We're in Culver City.
Well, don't encourage him. It's not like it hasn't happened before. Okay. All right, thank you guys. Everybody check out free parking. I love these mini docs. Like, great amount of information in a small amount of time. Zefrey, great work on it. We appreciate it. Thank you all of you for fighting for all these issues.
Yes.